After receiving heavy sentences from the military judiciary in September, medical staff from the main hospital in Bahrain are currently being retried in civil courts. An independent commission of inquiry into recent protests documented 46 deaths, instances of torture and arbitrary arrest. Is Bahrain on the path to reform, or have the commission's recommendations gone unnoticed? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. A group of Bahraini doctors sentenced to long jail terms for their role in anti-government protests have been back in court. Al Jazeera has learned that the retrial court case hearing against them has been adjourned. In March last year, Bahrain security forces raided the Salmaniya medical complex and detained 20 doctors and nurses who were treating injured protesters. A special military court convicted them of a number of offences, including attempting to overthrow the government. And in October, they received up to 15 years in prison. But the country's Attorney General ordered their release and announced that they'd be retried before a civilian court. Meanwhile, allegations of abuses continue. The US State Department has expressed concern to the Bahrain government over the apparent beating of the prominent rights activist Nabil Rajab at a rally on Friday. The Interior Ministry denied the accusation, saying the police found Rajab on the ground and took him to hospital. The Bahrain king recently agreed to implement reforms after an independent commission concluded that excessive force had been used by the security forces. So, our question of the day, is Bahrain truly on the path of reform, and what are the challenges? To answer this, we're joined by our panel of guests. In Bahrain, Mansoor Arayedh, chairman of the Gulf Council for Foreign Relations. In London, Saeed al-Shehabi, leader of the Bahrain Freedom Movement, that's an opposition movement. Also joining us in London is Saeed Bomaduha, Amnesty International's Bahrain researcher. Great to have you on board, all of you. Let me start with you, Saeed, from Amnesty International. Do you believe Bahrain is truly on the path to reform?
Well, I think it is very soon to say. Obviously, the Bahraini Independent Commission of Inquiry report was published in November with a lot of recommendations, and it's a damning report, and the government has committed itself to implementing all the recommendations. Yes, maybe there have been some positive steps taken by the government in this regard, but in practice the human rights violations continue, and we are very, very concerned that the security forces are still using excessive force to deal with demonstrations. There are still reports of torture and ill treatment. A lot of political prisoners are still in detention, even those who did not use violence or advocate violence. And a prime example, for example, was on Friday when a well-known human rights activist, Nabil Rajab, who was leading a demonstration, peaceful demonstration, he was beaten up by the security forces, by the anti-riot police, and he needed 3 or 4 hours treatment in hospital. So on the ground, you have, I'm afraid, you still have a lot of human rights violations continuing.
OK, Mansoor Arayedh, you there on the ground in Bahrain. What's your view? Has Bahrain turned a corner? Is it on the path to reform?
No, I see. This reform is a process. The two pillars that at least agreed upon at this stage is the BICI report and the national dialogue. What needs to be done is to look at these two pillars and see how have they been implemented on the ground. Yes, some of them have been implemented, others have not. Mistakes have been done. Either side, I mean, the government has also done mistakes. This is not the point. But the point is we need positive input from the amnesty, from the opposition, to help in understanding and for them to be part of the BICI implementation process.
OK, well, let's see if we get a positive response as you request from the opposition. Let's see if we get it from Saeed al-Shehabi. What's your response?
My response is that this regime is unreformable. You cannot reform dictatorship in any way. Whatever you do, the dictator will remain a dictator, the torturer will remain the torturer, as long as there is no reprimand or trial of any torture. So far, in the past 30 years, since opposition has become strong to the regime, not one single torturer has been the known torturers, including now in recent days, the dictator's sons themselves. They are involved in torture. So if you don't get a single person reprimanded for the excessive use of force or torture, then I don't understand how we can reform a regime that is intent on changing the whole demographic composition in order to get through its own political agenda.
Well, we've
so
already
I don't
talked
believe there is going to be any reform.
We've already talked about that independent commission. Let me remind people, on June the 29th of last year, the King of Bahrain ordered the independent fact-finding commission to investigate and assess events during the protests of February and March 2011. The investigation focused on how Bahrain's leaders dealt with the demonstrations during the unrest. Nearly 5 months later, on November the 23rd, the commission released a 500-page report, including about 9,000 testimonies. It documented 46 deaths, 559 allegations of torture and more than 4,000 cases of people being dismissed for taking part in the protests. The Commission says there's evidence of systematic torture of detainees. This included electric shocks, beatings and threats of rape. It also said the use of force on protesters made the situation a lot worse. The Commission's demanded the government review jail sentence issued by the state security courts. The chairman of the Commission said the death toll from the unrest reached 35, including 5 security personnel. Bahrain's King Hamad welcomed the report and said officials accused of abuse will be held accountable. He also pledged reform. Some observers say he disregarded the report's findings that Iran was not involved in the unrest in the island state and blamed Tehran's propaganda for fueling sectarian strife. Saeed from Amnesty International, it certainly wasn't a whitewash, was it?
Well, no, but I think it's very, very important that the government really start implementing the recommendations very, very seriously, not only at the legislative level, but also in practice. I think that's the most important thing, because, you know, it's probably easier to introduce certain laws or to reform certain articles in the penal code or criminal procedure code, but it's more difficult to actually implement changes in the behavior of the security forces, in the way they deal with protesters, in the way they deal with detainees, and I think we now, as an organization, Amnesty International, calls on the government to release all those people who have been detained in connection with the protests, but who haven't used or advocated violence, and some of these people have already received prison terms from the National Safety Court, but also from civilian courts. Also, to seriously investigate all allegations of torture, and bring this, the most important thing is also to bring those responsible to account. And I think it's very, very important that those responsible for all the human rights violations have to be held accountable. So the next few months obviously are going to be like a challenge for the government. And for us as an organization, we will continue to monitor the situation, and I'm afraid that so far in the last few weeks, I mean, we're still receiving a lot of reports of human rights violations, especially the excessive use of force by the security forces, but also the reports of torture and ill treatment.
Mansoor, Arayedh, you're a former member of the Shura Council, the upper house of Parliament. You know how things work in Bahrain. When you see that list of all of the things, all of the abuses that took place, what's your reaction to that, and how hard will it be to change that culture?
James, let me, I think before I came, I looked at the BICI report, and I just picked up 8 important things that are really happening on the ground. You see, I would like to read those to you because these are the basis for the real reconciliation and they are the basis for things that are happening on the ground. Let us see. All charges against protesters and public sector employees have been dropped, things that relate to freedom of speech. Also, they're looking into the private sector, also is under investigation. All civilian judiciaries have been reviewed and through the process by the national safety courts. Now it has been changed into the regular courts. Public prosecutor pursuing now 28 policemen accused of offenses, torture, death. This is in addition to the 20 other officials that have been also investigated previously. National Safety Agency have been stripped from its law enforcement and its chief has been replaced. All interviews within the police for civilians will be dealt with using basically, will be taped. Now, all of these are important.
They're important, but can I ask you this question? What about those people that were convicted on evidence that came from torture? Surely they should be released straight away. What about all of those people who were protesters who lost their job? There were thousands who lost their jobs because they were involved in the protest. Surely they should be reinstated.
Fully agreed. This is happening. It is in due course. We are in the middle of the process. I do agree with you. We want a stepped-up process, but still, there are positive things are happening. 4 mosques are being reinstated, are being rebuilt. 500 people will be employed in the interior ministries. I fully agree that the people that, you see, the charges that have been dropped because of freedom of speech need to go back to their works, and it's happening slowly. And that is where also Amnesty, we welcome Amnesty to come and work with us in trying to find out that all of the BICI proposals have been implemented. And I'm expecting also within the few weeks or few months, more implementation of the BICI. This process is not only important for opposition, it's important even for the government, because this is the basis of the reconciliation.
OK, Saeed al-Shehabi, tell me, we hear that it's happening slowly. Is it happening too slowly?
Well, it's not happening at all. I haven't seen a single person released because he was prisoner of conscience. Mr. Hassan Mushayma was transferred to hospital 2 days ago because of ill treatment. Now they are going to have operation on his ear because he was beaten repeatedly until he lost his hearing. Now, Dr. Abdul Singais is suffering, Dr. Abdul Wahab Hussein, all these, they have been put in jail until now for nothing more than calling for reform. We have been calling for dialogue for 30 years. Not a single time did dialogue come through. Not a single time did they really take serious steps to reform the situation. As for the BICI recommendations, we have to register that the head of the committee overseeing the implementation of these BICI reports had resigned last week, because he is of the belief that nothing could be done, because these implementations have not been put in order to be executed. They don't need, in fact, to have a committee that will take months to see how to implement things. You should stop torture now. You should not have attacked last night at least 20, 30 villages using chemical weapons, chemical gases, and causing so many injuries. You don't need to kidnap tens of people, young people as young as 30 until yesterday. And today,
can I just, sorry, you just made an allegation. You just made an allegation there. You said chemical gases. That's what's commonly known as tear gas. You're not suggesting anything beyond that, are you? And tear gas is not nice.
I'm not saying it is tear gas. I am saying it is chemical gas. I am saying it is a gas that once when it touches, that has resulted, first of all, in more than 12 deaths so far in the past 3 months, and that causes people to vomit, to have rashes, to have dizziness, and to be unable to breathe. So it is not really just tear gases, why we call it. I am sure this is a chemical weapon, and we have called on the WHO, World Health Organization, to investigate, because this is simply...
Well, let's ask Amnesty International about that allegation. Saeed from Amnesty International. I was last in Bahrain in February and March last year, and I certainly was there when the tear gas was fired. But anything else being fired? What do you make of that allegation?
Well, I mean, I was there in Bahrain at the end of November, early December, but as part of a delegation there, but we did not hear any reports of the use of chemical gas against the demonstrators. Certainly tear gas, yes, I mean, and that's the problem, because you know, the security forces have been using tear gas at will.
Go ahead,
no, but
please.
tear gas can actually... tear gas actually has contributed to the death of a lot of people there in Bahrain. Yeah, a lot, but more than 10 or 12 people since March. So, you know, when you use tear gas excessively, that is, you know, that can actually lead to death.
And what is Amnesty's view on the recent protests? Are you worried about the fact that the violence seems to be getting worse again?
Well, for us, if people are protesting and demonstrating peacefully, it is their right. They should be able to demonstrate peacefully, and the security forces should not use excessive force. And that's why we have been calling on the government to rein in its security forces. I mean, if they could, for example, arrest someone like Nabil Rajab, who is very, very well known, a very well-known human rights activist, arrest him simply because he was leading a peaceful demonstration, and beat him up, and you know, and kicking him and on the ground, and then he needed 3 hours in hospital. If they could do that to a well-known human rights activist, so imagine what they can do to other ordinary people then.
Mansoor, Arayedh, nothing's changed is the comment we're hearing from our other guests.
No, it's not. This is not really the point. The point is, when we're talking about reconciliation, what is really happening, Saeed al-Shehabi is talking about dealing the monarchy. That is not the way forward. Now, this kind of comments is not helping Bahrain. It will not help the reconciliation. It will not help the government. It will not help the protesters.
Well, the other thing that's not going to help Bahrain, I suspect, is the publicity again about the trial of the doctors. These were the doctors who were sentenced for up to 15 years in jail, and now they are back in court being retrialed. Let's remind our viewers about these doctors, because I was in Bahrain back on February the 17th last year, and I was in the Salmania hospital. Let's look at my report from then. A distraught doctor, overwhelmed by what's happened, cries out. Bahrain's largest hospital has become a place of shock and of anger, with medical staff asking how all of this could be considered by anyone as a proportionate use of force. These people were protesting peacefully when the brutal police crackdown began. Now the hospital beds are full, patients with shot wounds to their bodies, injuries caused by rubber-coated steel bullets, and others who are beaten with rifle butts.
It's a massacre by all means. People are shot because they are innocent. They haven't done anything. They were just protesting. What is this? We are in 21st century. I mean, we are in a civilized country. We are civilized people. These people were only demonstrating, and at the end of the day, they were shot dead.
It's Dr. Ghassan Dief, who was speaking to me in February. He was sentenced to 15 years in jail in the first military trial. He then is now being retried with the other doctors. Mr. Arayedh, do you think there should be this retrial, given that the evidence against these doctors came from forced confessions, we're told, possibly from torture?
Well, a retrial is a review of the verdicts and the review of the evidence. So this is what happened actually today. There is a review in the civilian courts by civilian judges to all the accusations and to all the evidence. And that's a due process. I mean, that is the only logical way to go forward.
But with the tainted evidence?
No, they are discussing now, today in court, there was a discussion on the evidence itself, how that evidence should be looked at in the civilian courts. And this is basically a review of all the verdicts. And that is due process.
Saeed Bomaduha, are you happy, Amnesty happy with this retrial?
You agree with the way those doctors were treated? You agree with it, do you?
He's asking you a question, Mr. Arayedh. Do you agree with the way the doctors have been treated?
Treated where?
The way they've been treated by your justice system?
In their torture and in their trial, and the way they dealt with them and accused them of all this. Do you agree with what happened, or do you disagree? Make it plain and clear, please.
No, it is clear. The answer is clear. You see, the National Safety Court is being looked at now. This is no longer there. It doesn't exist anymore. There is a review being done in the civilian courts. This is what's happening. Now, you agree that the civilian court is the only place that due process can happen. Where else would you take it?
OK, I want to ask a question about this trial to Saeed Bomaduha from Amnesty International. What's Amnesty's view? Do you think the trial should be going ahead, or should these doctors just be released?
Well, from the outset, Amnesty International expressed grave concern about the arrest and the detention and then trial of the medical doctors. From the very beginning, we received reports and we interviewed people there in Bahrain as well about the allegations of torture used against some of the doctors. And in fact, when they were brought to trial before the National Safety Court months ago, some of them in the court, they said they were forced, they were tortured, and their confessions were based on torture. And then they were sentenced some of them to 15 years, others to 5 years. And so trials before that court were grossly unfair. And so we welcomed the fact that their case was moved from a National Safety Court, which was a military court, to a civilian court. And so for us now, the most important thing is that they receive a fair trial, a trial that is in accordance to international standards for fair trial. We welcome the decision to allow them today, I believe there was a decision to allow them to go back to their work and also to travel abroad. But they have to receive a fair trial according to international standards for fair trial.
Well, our programme is coming towards the end, but I want to ask Saeed al-Shehabi a question, because we've talked all this time about human rights abuses. We haven't talked about what the protesters were calling for in the first place, which is reform in Bahrain. What exactly do you, the opposition, want?
Well, the opposition for the past 30 years, first of all, were calling for the reinstatement of the 1973 Constitution. That was until the 14th of February. But since then, they have the situation has dramatically changed. It has become clear to the majority of Bahrainis that this regime is not better than the Mubarak regime or the Tunisian regime, and it must go. I think many people now, I am not saying whether it is 70 or 80%, I'm just saying many people are calling for the removal of the regime, because simply it cannot be. It has been proven once and again and 3 times and 10 times that it is a regime that tortures, that claims.
We've gone through all those allegations.
Mr.
Arayedh, I would like your quick response to that, please.
There is no consensus for this. The consensus is it's a reform process. Bahrain is not a revolution. It doesn't have the elements of a revolution like Egypt and so on. These are GCC countries, they are monarchies. They will reconcile with democracy. This is the only way forward. And the national dialogue was the basis for this reform process. I cannot see any other way of doing it.
Well, that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to our guests in Bahrain, Mansoor Arayedh in London, Saeed Al-Shehabi and Saeed Bomaduha from Amnesty International. And thank you all for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Today we were discussing Bahrain. What do you want us to discuss next time? Send us your feedback. Tell us what you think of this programme too, what you thought of today's show. Inside Story at aljazeera.net. That's it for us for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.